I'm going to.
I'm going
Bye-bye,
to.
guys.
Bye.
Thank
Dela,
you,
thanks for your
CCW.
participation.
Yeah, thanks to everyone.
Good to
You're
see you,
welcome.
It was
Glenn.
a pleasure.
I hope to hear
I don't
more
really
from you.
say much.
I hope you're there next time.
Sorry.
And I'm going to leave too. And thank you, everybody. I think the energies were kind of cool. So thank you very much.
Bye.
Josh, your hand is still up, I think.
Yeah, I'm still here. I was waiting to talk, but it didn't happen. That's the way it goes sometimes.
What were you going to say? Talk now.
Oh, I was just gonna say about what Sam was saying about fighting, and I was trying to think why I was using that word, and I was like, do I need to use the word fighting? And then I was thinking about we're not all objective intellectual people on this planet, and there's a lot of people that don't think objectively. And if everyone did think like Sam, that would be wonderful, where we could say, this is what I see. What is your experience? Let's talk about what we're looking at. And I think that would be wonderful if we lived in that world. I've just never lived in that world. Everyone I've ever come across gets, their, what is it called? That frontal lobe, that part, that,
Amygdala.
chimpanzee brain. Yeah, amygdala. We've all experienced that where people were talking completely logical, objectively, and then the other person's like, shut up, you're a dum-dum head. And you're like, what? Like, you're a dum-dum head? And they're like, you look ugly. I don't like you. And it's just like, how do you engage with people on that level?
Well, I just want to say that I don't know what the percentages are, but it doesn't just have to do with intellectual and non-intellectual, because I know a lot of people that are not considered intellectuals, and they're much easier to get along with and to reach consensus with. And just because the intellects don't call you a dum-dum, instead they do it a different way. And it's couched in a whole bunch of phrasing that maybe the other people can't even respond to because they're not even sure what it means.
Yeah, my experience, not my truth, is just in all different situations. Some of the best ones that I've enjoyed and that were most fun is when I met someone and we butted heads, and it only lasted so long before we both stopped our egos and listened to each other. And then we're buying each other a beer and we're having a great time. They're telling me about their wife and the problems. And that's been my experience in life, is just there needs to be some sort of conflict to get that out of the way so you can go to the next level of communication and conversation. And that's why I like fighting, because I don't shy away from it, so that we're not just being nice for niceness sake. We're being nice because it's coming from our heart space. Like, we really want to know what each other feels and thinks. And I don't know what that's called. Maybe fighting is the wrong word, but like,
It's called research.
I was research. I don't know.
I'll give you an example. Perhaps the most profound example of conflict is two wonderful, powerful theories which are mutually inconsistent, and that is Einstein's model of gravitational mechanics and the quantum theory. And these two are very powerful, wonderful theories, except that they are mutually inconsistent. They can't coexist. They can't both be true. And so research is attempting to find a more powerful theory that subsumes both and resolves the inconsistency. And in my own career, my own experience, when I was at Bell Labs doing network planning, you would have two proposals for how to evolve the network to the next level, and they were mutually inconsistent. You could have one but not the other, and each one had benefits and shortcomings, and they were not the same. And very often it would fall into my lap to figure out how to resolve this conflict between, should we go this way or this way for the next step? And invariably I would analyze the strengths and weaknesses, and then propose a third model, which is more powerful and subsumes all the good things of both and eliminates the bad things of both. And that would typically take close to a year to come up with a proposal that resolves the conflict and gives you the better model. Everybody says, oh yeah, your model is now better than mine, but it's also better than the one I don't like. And that will be the resolution. But it took enormous amount of intellectual work and research which is why I earned a living doing it. But that was really hard. And it took a third party.
Can I ask you a question? Because I'm still conflicted with these two models. You're saying Einstein's model is a model of
Gravity.
what is of gravity? So he's got energy. What is that model of gravity? I'm still trying to understand.
First of all, the mathematical formula for it is so arcane, so technical that very few people can even read and understand what the mathematical formula says. I've watched videos by Brian Greene trying to reveal just what the terms are in Einstein's model, and it's beyond my pay grade. All I know is that people who can actually do the calculations get the right answer. GPS works, for example. So, and the thing about gravitation is that it generally applies to the cosmological big picture. You don't use gravity when you have two little tiny things close to each other, because that's what quantum mechanics really gives you the model that's usable. Because the gravitational attraction between two tiny things close together is virtually insignificant. You can forget about it. But if you have gigantic, planets and suns and things that are very far apart, then quantum mechanics doesn't tell you very much. The gravitational model really covers the big picture, and the quantum mechanics covers the tiny picture. And when you sort of get the in between, the gray area, this is where now you can't really use either. It's a mixture, some kind of combination of both, and you have to resolve it.
From what I understand, when you're working at that smaller level, that Planck length, that tiny quantum level, it's two things in one, meaning it's a wave and a particle, and the observer changes the actual view.
Oops, we lost you. We lost your audio.
Is that correct?
Now
You're back.
we lost your audio for about 20 seconds.
Yeah, my earbud went out. I'm just saying, at the large scale, we're still observing the whole universe, so we don't really know how the whole thing works. And at the small scale, when we observe it, we get a different outcome than when we're not observing it. Or when Stacy observes it, she gets a different outcome because it's subjective to my observation. It changes because of some sort of force that we don't know yet. Are we?
Well, I'll give you an example where the two sort of reveal their incompatibility. You can be standing on the surface of the earth and you weigh something, you have a force of gravity pulling you down. And the person next to you, you say, well, they feel the same force of gravity that I do because they're right next to me. And gravity basically is, it's a big effect. But if you have two atomic clocks, which are right next to each other, and you move them a little bit apart this way, they start to keep different time. If you move them apart this way, they consistently keep different time, because as you move away from the center of the earth, the amount of gravity is just a tiny little bit less, but computable. And then you can use Einstein's model to say, this clock is going to run a little faster than this one by a known amount because of the distance from the center of the earth. If they're side by side, the difference in gravity from one side to the other is, in a sense, random. Because you can't really figure out, well, why is it going to be slightly more gravity on this side than that side? But you do know that there'll be some kind of fluctuation in the gravity, and therefore timekeeping will not be consistent side by side. Clearly not above and below, but hard to figure out side by side. And that's kind of the thing that reveals why you need both models. This will tell you nominally how much time you're going to keep on the two clocks, but not the difference. And then quantum mechanics looks at the difference between two things which are very close together and very small differences. And this is why they think there might be something called quantum gravity. The gravity is quantized. But we don't have the way to measure the quantum effect of gravity, although it's hypothesized and probably correct. But we don't have a good model of quantum gravity. That would resolve the two. If we could come up with a model that resolves these effects at the quantum level.
And I extrapolate that out to the social sciences of the perception of each individual human being could be slightly off.
Right.
or I'm seeing color slightly different, or I'm
Right.
perceiving frame rates
Yes.
slightly because my retina was forming slightly different in my mom's
Right.
womb than
Yeah.
yours.
Our neural networks could be identical except for one connection. And that one connection, at some point, that one connection will reveal a different outcome. Most of the time we'll get the same outcome, but once in a blue moon, that one little difference will manifest. And that's the quantum difference. That's the difference that makes the difference. Very hard. You can hypothesize it, you say it's probably true, but working out a mathematical model that resolves it, this is why it's not fair to say that it's intellectually lazy. The scientists who are trying to figure out, how to resolve Einstein's gravity and Feynman's quantum mechanics, they're not intellectually lazy. They are the best bloody, mathematical scientists in the world. They're doing string theory and all this kind of stuff. And they've been at it for more than half a century and haven't come up with a resolution yet.
Well, I don't know if they're allowed to come up with a resolution, meaning in order to get to a different, like you said, that third place, it takes a lot of work.
Right.
And when someone's trying to get to that third place, someone comes out like a Jenga piece and pulls the thing out and it just falls down, and they never get to stand up the third model because too many people say that will ruin my career.
Yeah.
That will ruin my hypothesis. That's why when Martin was saying, do you agree with hypothesis, theory, and I forgot the last one, I said no, because I don't believe that creating more rules is going to solve the language problem.
Yeah. And that's very important what you just said, because if you look at pretty much all the governance models that have been tried since the invention of governance systems, go all the way back to Mesopotamia, where we get the introduction of the rule of law. You had theocracy, you had aristocracy, monarchy, democracy, and a variety of other variations. And every governance model that's been introduced and tested has been found to have some flaw in it. There's some situation where it gets, like democracy gets deadlocked, and you can't get a resolution of a solution problem because you have two pretty much equal and opposite competing sides, and you get deadlock. And America is stuck in polarization and deadlock, even though we theoretically have democracy. You can get rid of that if you have autocracy, because you only got one decider. So in Russia, they got one decider. They can resolve the question, but then you look at autocracy and say, oh, but if they make a blunder, if the autocrat makes a blunder, then you're going to have Russia and Ukraine or some other, Hitler and whatever. So each of these has strengths and weaknesses. And you say, well, what do they all have in common? What they all have in common is the fundamental paradigm of the rule of law, law and order, crime and punishment. Look at the sanctions. So you say, okay, doesn't matter how the decision is made, what you end up with is a crime and punishment paradigm, a law and order paradigm, a rule of law paradigm. And that's where the blunder is. The blunder is rule of law, crime and punishment, law and order. And how did they fix that in the technical world? They evolved up from rules to protocols. And the introduction of protocols is a profound upgrade from in government. So if you take away all the people and just let the machines on the internet operate, all the machines have agreed by definition to practice TCP/IP protocols. And they may not be doing anything terribly creative or interesting, but they're also at peace.
So imagine, sorry to interrupt, I just got excited. Imagine if one of those protocols were taken away and then the system starts to degrade because you took away the protocol. And that's what I see with the United States of America, is they thought about all these protocols, but then they made a protocol where within the system, it can create protocols and take away protocols, but given enough time, it's supposed to balance itself out. And the question is, if you took away a couple of the call requests in TCP/IP, it would start to degrade. All the nodes couldn't talk to each other.
You would lose Zoom, for example, because HTTP is the protocol that Tim Berners-Lee introduced. It's a creative protocol, and it allowed the internet to do more things functionally than you could with the previous set of protocols. So every time you add a new protocol, you add a new kind of functionality. So you had the World Wide Web is the sort of the classical example. But notice something, if you start with just rule-based reasoning, if you limit your mathematics to rule-based, you have an impoverished language that doesn't have enough creativity or insight to invent the next level up. So you go from rule-based, which is kindergartens, because kindergartners can understand rules, but kindergartners are not protocol-based yet. That comes later. So there's an innovation that's not a rule-based kind of thinking that gets you to protocol-based, which gives you the more functionality, more more feature-rich and more peaceable, because you don't have this crime and punishment issue anymore. But it's still not as good as you can get. So then you go to functions.
Well,
above protocols are functions, and functions takes a lot of intellectual effort because that's mathematics. And mathematics, if you look at your general population of Homo sapiens, most Homo sapiens are not that good at mathematics. Now, there are people who are fabulous at mathematics, people like Einstein and Feynman and lots of others, okay? But you get to a rarer and rarer population who can function at the level, so you get up to functions. Now, once you have the world of functions, which is really mathematical, then you can go up to the level of models, because models generally are built out of functions, scientific models.
There's a thing in the discourse right now this past week where Elon Musk is calling for large corporations to open source the algorithms of the town square of the public discourse, which is social media. And if they open source it, enough mathematicians could look at those algorithms and see where the biases and see where things are going out of protocol. That could fix a lot of problems with autocracies rising up.
Right. So you find the dysfunctionality, the flaws, the weaknesses, the dysfunctionalities, and then you can get, say, more robust functions, which have less problems, fewer flaws in them. And so you have more robust models where things are more harmonious and fewer inconsistencies. Finding inconsistencies is quite a, this is what, if you go into the genre of puzzle solving, most puzzle solving is weeding out inconsistencies. Go on the channel where they solve Sudoku problems, like cracking the cryptic. Most of the time is spent for, this could be the possible solution for this part of the puzzle, but is it going to be consistent with that part? And if you find an obscure inconsistency, you rule out those possibilities and you weed your way down to the one set that uniquely is consistent.
I did that last week with your advice. I went into a puzzle room and we were trying to solve a puzzle together. I did exactly what you said to try to figure it out.
It's full of insight to watch the best puzzle solvers search like crazy for the inconsistency that rules out the wrong solution. The solution that looks fabulous until you realize, oh, at the end of the line, I can't solve the puzzle. I get an inconsistency. I break the rule of the puzzle. Okay.
Yeah.
So once you get up to models, so in systems thinking, you're always trying to get really good models. And if you can have a collection of models that are mutually consistent, then you have a system.
Right. And so when the system keeps going, if there's a technological advancement in the system and you use that to power over, for example, in the government structure of the United States, it was the right to bear arms. At that time, arms were muskets.
Blunderbusses.
Right. So you have the right to be able to have an equal playing ground with the power of the government structure and the people structure. But once that got too much to the point where the government structure had weapons that were way overpowering, you get this debate of, oh, we should have AR-57s and cannons and tanks. Right. And that is the pendulum, I think, that has swung too far in the ability for the right to peaceably assemble. Because when I tried to peaceably assemble last time, I got sprayed with tear gas. And their weapons, that we had weapons of the people peacefully standing there, and they had weapons of tear gas. If we had tear gas and we tear gassed them back, that's what I mean by fight.
You come back with Molotov cocktails, but remember the criteria for the right to bear arms was well-regulated militia.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is it becomes dysregulated. The ability to be well regulated goes out the window. And they forget about the fact that it's got to be well regulated. And that gets into feedback control theory, because that's what regulation, the mathematics of well regulation requires the intellectual faculties of understanding how to build a feedback control theory that is well regulated. And what we have is not well regulated.
Well,
In fact, it's full of violence, because weapons trade violence, different kinds of violence, but violence. And that we don't want that.
yeah, I think the people should have the right to put an intellectual person against another intellectual person with rules that are even on an even playing ground, and let them debate. You know, that's what our public discourse is supposed to have, proper debates, but I think that's been skewed. And where I see things going wrong is within a government structure, when you don't play by the same rules. That's what I saw in the Democratic Party, is that they weren't playing by the same rules, where Hillary Clinton was a little bit skewing the rules for, you know, Bernie Sanders to be able to even talk peacefully. One thing I noticed when that was all going on is I was watching on a webcam Hillary Clinton talking, and I was watching on a webcam Bernie Sanders talking. Then I watched the media showing from one angle, and it looked like Hillary Clinton had thousands of people there. She had 400 and Bernie Sanders had 2,000, but the media made it look the opposite. And that's when I was like, you know, it's the same thing with the debate with Nixon and JFK.
Right.
He looked calm and collective, so thus he got elected. And that skewing of perception of reality is the cyber warfare that's going on right now outside of Ukraine. There's a huge cyber battle in hacker space for the world's dominant of reserve currency that I don't see the media talking about as much. But
see, if both sides actually abide by the same set of rules, you have a chess game. You have a game which everybody is obeying the same set of rules and they're not cheating. But then you have a chess game, or a game like Go, or any, you know, Chinese, pick any game that you like, which is strictly rule based and everybody plays by the same rules. But you have an astronomical number of legal games of chess, an astronomical number, and it's intellectual. It takes enormous intellectual power to use the rules in a way that overpowers the other guy who's using the same set of rules. But eventually, the best chess players get to the point where they're not as good as the computers, because the computers can now do more calculations. They can do more intellect than human intellect can do. And so now the computers can be the best human chess players. Yeah. But the point is, you're still rule-based, so you're still in a state of conflict, and you still have a winner and a loser, unless you play forever and just basically have a deadlock.
Well, what if you're hiding the rules? That's what I see happening in society, is the rules get hidden.
The point is that the rules of chess will fit on one sheet of paper, but the law books will fill a whole freaking library.
And thus it's hiding in plain sight. Like, I just looked up the laws of the United States. They have to publish, and they do publish openly, all of the changes, all of the rules, so people can have public discourse. But yet to find that, it's sort of like digging through a needle in a haystack.
And you can't compute in advance. If I pick this rule to follow, and you pick that rule to follow, we might not know in our lifetime the resolution of that. And that's why you have courts, because courts say, well, these two rules are mutually inconsistent. That's called antinomy in the law. Antinomy says you have two rules on the books, but they can't both be valid because they're mutually inconsistent. And what you end up with is the space of legal moves is null. There's nothing you can, there's actually a book by a guy here in Boston who says, I think it's called 3 Felonies a Day, something like that. The point is that there's so many laws on the books that almost everything you do violates some obscure law someplace. And every day, the average person commits 3 felonies. Obscure, but nonetheless. And so you end up with a system that's deadlocked, that if you want to obey the law, you have to sit there and do nothing.
Well, isn't that the game that's being played, is setting precedents and going through which locks the other one, and then stating your case of why at this moment in time this one holds precedent over this one.
Yeah, I mean, look at Clarence Thomas. Should he recuse himself from cases that involved adjudicating the January 6th thing because his wife was promoting, the overthrowing the results of the election? So you have this. So what happens is you get outside of the world of law into the world of ethics.
Yeah.
And ethics is the next higher level, but ethics is a calculus. And the calculus of ethics, take it from somebody who's tried both, is more challenging intellectually than the calculus of Newton. The mathematical calculus of Newton is really hard. Not very many people master it. And the calculus of ethics is easily an order of magnitude more challenging to compute.
So I showed you that it was called The Birth of the Word by Deb Roy from the MIT Computer Lab.
Yeah, I know.
And at the end of his talk, his people they were studying 5 years of a baby talking and recording all 5 years of their life, every sound, every visual.
His own baby.
They took that and put it on top of social media and the discourse of the regular mainstream media and calculated it together. And that was in 2012.
Right.
So at this point in time, with the Homeland Security Act, they have the ability with all of these devices to see everything that we're going to say as a populace of millions and millions of people before we say it, thus an unfair advantage of a government structure to power over the people because they already know before it's even spoken what the public discourse should be by manipulating that public discourse.
And by the way, it took them a long time to figure out that worldwide, the first 2 words that babies learn are the same word in every language, and they are mama and papa. And that's the same word in every language as the first words that babies learn. Took them forever to figure that out.
My kid learned Google before mama and dada. I'm not kidding. I wish I was, but that's the only word that she'll say is goo.
And that comes from statistical signal detection, because you have all these phonemes, and the phonemes that you hear repeated most frequently, and not just repeated, but also seem to be associated with the same phenomenon, the same artifact. That's the ones the babies learn. That's statistical signal detection, which is extremely sophisticated mathematics that they use in the Deep Space Network.
It's amazing to watch her, because we have a smart home. So I say, Google, turn on the lights, Google, turn on the TV, Google this.
Right.
And now when I say the word Google, she looks around to see what's going to happen.
Right.
Because she's tried to understand the world around her.
You change the paradigm for what's the most powerful phoneme, in the modern 21st century home culture.
It's, to me, I think one of my friends, he worked for the CDC. So he was constantly, checking all the diseases in the Lower East Side of Manhattan.
Right.
And he had all the statistical analysis, and we got into some deep philosophical conversations. And he said the power of a nation comes down to its ability to police taxes.
Yeah. By the way, you used the word disease earlier, and there is a phoneme that's associated with disease. The cough becomes associated with the concept of disease. And so if somebody says something in a social setting that's a little bit odd, some people, that's the signal that disease.
Mm-hmm.
So there you have another example of statistical signal detection. The muffled cough is your feedback loop that, what's going down verbally is diseased.
Well, I'm concerned about signal detection. I'm concerned that the way we're receiving signals and that algorithm that's being used to propagate those signals is hidden. And I do think we need to open source
Absolutely
how all computer systems are being done, because the computer has taken over so much of our lives from the 1980s when I started.
And look at the emergence of search engine optimization algorithms. Try to figure out what Google's algorithm is, second guess it, and then defeat it with the techniques of SEO. And so this whole competition between Google's search algorithm, which is proprietary and secret, and SEO is trying to divine it and then overpower it.
Have you seen what's going on, Barry? There's a GPT-3 and now we have beta GPT-4. So there's tools that I use now where the computer is trying to battle the other computer and they're fighting each other. If I want to write copy, I use a GPT-3 SEO to write copy and to look at the feedback loop. So it's computers versus computers now.
Right.
The humans are out of the equation.
And that means that this thing is consuming more energy because it's trying to solve a problem that's very hard. And so it's using a lot of compute power and a lot of energy to solve a problem that's too hard for this kind of a problem solving. So we end up spending more energy in kind of a silly competition. It'd be better to have a protocol that says, let's be sane and sensible and not have a competition that keeps consuming more and more resources.
Well, isn't that what unsustainable means?
Exactly, because there's a finite, any resource which is scarce, and some of them are, the more that you consume, the more you create an unsustainable culture for human systems and living systems.
Yeah, I dream about a world where 20 years from now, the younger generation creates a boring machine that goes into all the landfills in the world and mines our trash and reappropriates it into the bare essence of each element. And then we reconfigure so we have a sound loop of matter.
And look at Elon Musk. One of his companies is called the Boring Company.
Yeah.
He's already pioneering, boring technology.
Have you seen what he's doing with the bricks that come out the back?
No.
He's selling them for 1.5 cents a piece, these little bricks that they're creating with this boring machine. But that thinking, if you went through a landfill and you could get all the rare earth minerals that had been mined beforehand with energy and reuse those into machines in the future, we have it. Yeah, I believe we're going to solve this problem. I'm very optimistic.
So he's saying the ore that he's digging out of the boring machine is worth 1.5 cents a brick in terms of what you could recover from it.
He put a price on it to start selling it, but then he's not boring enough. He doesn't have as many boring projects, not boring, sad boring, but boring into the ground. But as time moves forward, if you look at history, there's been times where we've gone deep into the ground as humanity. And there's been, you look at the outer space, there's times when we go through the Kuiper Belt and we get bombarded.
Right.
And humanity has lived through those times. So to me, it's just cyclical 26,000 year cycles. And if we don't know, I think the whole solution to all of our problems comes down to understanding time. And if you look at time versus meaning derivatives of what am I trying to say? What's the scientific word for you've got one thing, you've got another thing?
Cause and effect.
Relationship between the two. Sorry, my brain just farted. At any rate, there's mathematical equations to relate this system and the calculation in between the two systems.
The computing the interaction model. How do they interact with each other? If one perturbs this way, does it cause a perturbation over here that's in some sense obeys a discoverable model? If I do this on this side, does it do that on that side? Is there a cause and effect relationship that's scientifically observable and predictable?
I'll remember it after we hang up. There's a mathematics for that. And there's a whole science of mathematics of calculating that. But with those causations, if you just look at sunspots versus wars versus economic, there's real correlations between the timing. I've just noticed like a cycle in America. It's so obvious to me. I don't know why people don't notice it, but every January we have an economic boom, and then it goes into a downturn, then it booms back up in April, and it goes into a downturn, it booms. It's these quarterly reports of corporations, and they're different ones that lie and ones that don't lie.
Yeah.
And then them finding out at the end of the year the truth, and all of the journalists and all of the SEC and all of Wall Street figuring out who's lying and who's not. Right. And it goes all the way right before Christmas. It booms up again. to the highest point, and then the January quarterly reports, and it also falls in line with winter, spring, summer, fall. Of more people are on vacation in the summer, so they're not looking at their. It's such an obvious cycle. You could just win the game if you invested in that cycle. In Wall Street, it's so obvious. You could just look at all of the Dow or the S&P 500. You can just see that cycle in those 4 quarters.
But you wouldn't be very productive because you wouldn't be creating any new goods and services. You merely be adjusting the timing of.
But the whole thing is not productive. It's all a game. It's not even real anyway.
Exactly. You're not doing anything innovative or creative. You're just locally optimizing.
Yeah, well, they're splitting off stocks now. They show that when they do a stock split, it's not doing anything. It's just a game of perception.
Yeah.
Do you want to own 10 shares of something versus 1 share?
Yeah, look what Johnson & Johnson is doing.
Yep.
They spun off their baby powder company and then let it go bankrupt. And that's gaming the rule of law.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't have to pay out all the claims.
I just think it's time. Like each country works at different time frames, and some countries are older than others. And I think everyone sees time differently. And I think that's where we're having a major problem in the world is we all have different time, like even different years that we live in, from, the Hebrew calendar to the Chinese calendar, Persian calendar.
It's the visionary thinker versus the myopic thinker. It's much easier to be a myopic thinker because you don't have to think so far in the future. To be a visionary thinker, you have to have reliable models that can anticipate, foresee what's going to happen in the distant future and work that into the equation. So we have very few visionary thinkers, people who think beyond their own lifetime. We have a surfeit of people who think for the next quarter or even just the next week.
Mm-hmm.
This is a great flaw in our culture. We're very myopic as a species, and most species are myopic. It takes a lot more intellectual prowess and scientific modeling to anticipate long-term consequences. This is why the environment's going to hell. We started the industrial age, 150 years ago, and we weren't computing. Not enough people were looking into the far future to see how this is going to create an unsustainable atmospheric condition, climate condition.
Well, I think we need to share data. I think that's the only way we're going to get out of this mess is to share the data that's being collected by multiple sources and not keep it in a competition space where it's only helping one corporation.
Yeah. And not just the data, but the implications of what that data is telling us. Because you can have the data and you don't have a model to say what the data is telling you. So you need the model to say, if this is the data, this is what we can expect next year, next decade, next century. And if that looks like it's going down the tubes, you got to cut back. You got to say, this data is telling us something that's meaningful.
Yep. I apologize, Barry. The data is telling me that the baby's awake.
Okay.
So thank you for a good conversation, because I do believe that we can start open sourcing some of our thinking models, data, and the word algorithm is used so commonly. I wish that we just constantly teach each other how our individual experienced algorithms, like I had this happen and then this happened and this happened, and that made me think this is the way it is.
I want people to think not just rules, because everybody learns about rules in kindergarten. I want them to think about protocols and how protocols change our culture, and then how functions come into play, and how functions are important, but they're abstract because they're mathematical, and then how models come into the picture, and then how systems come into the picture. Most people are operating down here at the kindergarten level of rules. Very few people know it.
The Japanese culture, Barry?
Sorry?
The Japanese culture?
What about it?
It's very protocol based.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So the more that you can ascend this ladder from rules to protocols to functions to models to systems thinking, the more chance we have of surviving. This is existential thinking or systems thinking. And this is where somebody like Martin, for example, I can tell Martin is very high up in this ladder between rules and protocols and functions and models and systems. Sam is too. Sam and I both have some experience with Stanford University systems thinking education. Most people don't. Most people are down here at look at politicians, the rule of law. rule-based order. They keep talking about rule-based order in Europe. Excuse me, chaos theory rules that out. The rule basis is mathematically chaotic. So when you say rule-based order, that's an oxymoron. It's a disproven paradigm.
Can we make a video showing that? Because I think that's a thing that I read James Glick's Chaos book, and I understand that at one level, but not at a higher level where I could teach it to someone else.
I think if you read Gleick's book,
Yeah.
I think you will not find in Gleick's book the corollary that rule-based systems are mathematically chaotic.
Oh. Come say hi to Barry.
Wow. Big.
There's Heiner, and that's a picture of Sam. Say hi to Heiner. And that's Stacy.
Hello.
She just woke up. Good morning.
Joshua, when did you discover or learn or find out that rule-based systems are mathematically chaotic?
I think when I first saw the Mandelbrot set shown in a computer system, it was 92 or 93 at our office.
Yep.
And they were showing that, and they kept saying to me, this is a living thing that's living in the computer. And I was like, huh? What are you talking? It can't be alive. And then my friend from Montreal showed me the algorithm in C++ to create the Mandelbrot living thing.
It's a tiny little formula. Z equals Z squared plus C or something like that. I forget exactly. It's a very short, it's like 4 symbols in a formula. It's an iterative system with a very simple iteration rule.
Yeah, and that's what led me to start studying. Before I got to sacred geometry, I was, hey, yes. What do you want to say? Yeah, I'm still learning, but I kind of like with all of philosophy, I learned that when I was 7 or 8 years old, my dad would read Plato and Socrates and talk about the difference. And subjective versus objective.
Right.
But then I figured there had to be something that takes the subjective and objective and puts it together. And when I got to the chaos understanding of there are rules, there's systems that to have no order that have order.
Yeah.
And I think you can put, I'm at the point now where I believe you can put any order, any model around any system you want, and that will work for you, but it will not work for the whole.
Oh, yeah. So this is, I think, is one of the epiphanies that I think our population, our human population, hasn't yet gotten to this epiphany about what is the dynamic behavior of rule-based systems. Too many people think it creates an orderly governance model. Sorry, we have 6,000 years of empirical evidence that it doesn't, and then we have 20th century mathematical demonstration that it doesn't. And therefore, you have to ask yourself the question: how do we emerge out of this blunder, this mathematical blunder, and get to a governance model that doesn't reify and repeat this same blunder that's been around for 6,000 years?
Barry, have you read Yuval Harari's 3 books, The Sapiens?
No, I haven't read his books. I've listened to him on a number of hour-long interviews.
I feel like out of everyone I've ever read, he broke it into 3 things: past, present, and future as a historian. And it's Sapiens, Homo Deus, and 21 Problems for the 21st Century. So it's what happened in the past, here's the present, and then here's the future.
In terms of that video you're talking about, I would love to see that video. I've seen videos on chaos theory, which are fabulous, but they are purely abstract mathematical presentations of chaos theory. They don't take the insight away and apply it to human systems, which is what the next big step is.
I think you've
That's a huge paradigm shift.
Of creating it in a framework of fictions.
Yeah.
So is this real or is it fictitious?
Yeah. And people have been writing stories. I mean, Dostoevsky, Crime and Punishment, dysfunctional culture. He basically caricatures the dysfunctionality of the Russian governance model, back 150 years ago, whenever it was. So yeah, the literature, the literature and the history are full of evidence but very few people have really thought through all what all that evidence in mathematics says and come to that duh.
Yeah. Well, when I visited Egypt, I had our taxi driver was like, "Hey, moron, we invented brain surgery in the 7th century." Like, it just blew my mind at how they're like, "We already thought about all of this back in the 6th century."
The theologians of 3,500 years ago figured it out, and they wrote some fairy tales. They wrote the Garden of Eden story and a few other stories, which if you can understand how to read the stories, you can see they're allegories or metaphors for what I've just been talking about.
Well, most people don't know that they're allegories and metaphors, and that's the problem, is that the true information is hidden on purpose in metaphors and allegories in order to keep people from getting persecuted.
That was the audience that they had 3,500 years ago. You had to tell stories at the level of a kindergarten, fable. Aesop's fables. You try to teach ethics with Aesop's fables. That's basically the medium. That was the most effective medium for the population then. And still today, storytelling is a very powerful medium, because if I try to get up and do a mathematical analysis at the graduate level, 95% of the population is not even going to be able to understand it, even if they attempt to attend to it. Stacy just put
It's that on purpose, and it's called the occult. It's hidden on purpose in a way that it's not understood by everybody on purpose.
This is the intellectual laziness. It's not really intellectual laziness. Even if you gave everybody the opportunity to learn mathematics at the graduate level, most people would drop out at some point because it's simply beyond their capacity to focus that intently on mathematics and still earn a living, still put food on the table. Stacy wanted to say something.
Yeah, I want to go back to what Joshua said about hiding things on purpose for fear of persecution, because I think that plays a huge role. I watched today the video that Eugen posted, 2 of them, which were fabulous. And I was thinking, well, first of all, I was thinking what happens to women in that role of genius, because they would get locked away even quicker than the male counterparts did. But this whole idea of not being able to say something outside the box or think outside the box, have to couch it in a story, that's a big problem that faces us today.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I would love to be able to write stories or make, artistic presentations of this arcane mathematics, but I don't know how to do that. But I do know how to earn a living at it in a job in a high-tech company, which is what I ended up doing.
Yep. And everything's so high tech now. I can't even keep up with it now. Like, the one thing I like, Stacy, in that Yuval Harari book is they talked about the way women collaborate and the way men collaborate.
Very different.
And I've been waiting for 20 years to see more women in the high-tech fields. And I realized that the most brilliant women in science do it individually on their own because it's hard to collaborate with other women. And the way that men are kind of stupid, they're just like, "Oh, okay, that sounds good, let's do it." And that's what they wrote in that book, is that men believe other men's lies and go off to war and fight for no reason, whereas women are like, "That doesn't seem right. No, I'm not. No,
it's not right. It's not right."
I hope this woman doesn't do it."
And it's more than just in tech. I was talking with some of my women friends. It happens with comedy too. You see like a woman comedian, she has to go and do her own thing, because even that kind of collaboration doesn't work with artistic expression.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, whereas I've worked in the comedy world, the men will all be laughing and the woman's like, "That's not funny." That's stupid. That's not even clever. Like, that's stupid. That's men telling fart jokes and being, talking about their penises, just being silly.
By the way, Chris Rock claims he never heard of alopecia before that episode. He claims that. Now, whether that's really
Well, he never heard that she had it. I don't think he said he never.
Okay, yeah, I think you're right. It said he didn't. Yes, he didn't know that she had it.
Right, and I believe that. I didn't know.
I don't think, did he even write that joke? I thought they were.
I don't know.
The one that wrote that.
Or are there editors who go over the set of jokes? I don't know any of that.
Well,
I
that-
listened. Oh,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead, Stacy.
I was going to say, this brings me back to the whole peace conversation from the last call, because again, I looked at that whole instance as a teachable moment. You can find peace by doing that. Yeah, that's all I had to say.
But the thing about teachable moment is, what is the item to be learned and is it learned? There's two
were
separate
many-
questions.
Well, there were many items to be learned. And as I said on one of my posts that you may have been watching, a conversation that was taking off, some of it was really, it's not appropriate to discuss on social media because people are coming from their own wounds and triggers.
Right.
So if you were somebody that was made fun of, you reacted more to the joke. If you were someone that had been hit, you were, there were so many different things, and just people were going and discussing it, which was even more ironic because you're talking about how wrong that situation is and you're replicating the same dynamics
Yeah.
in your speech and not seeing it.
So for me, the interesting part is, what, if anything, are people learning? What triggered the learning? What was the teachable moment that triggered the learning? What are people learning, and what are people failing to learn that's available to be learned? These are really hard things to eke out of these single episodes. But
Barry, I think what was most important, you talked about peace theory.
Yeah.
For me, the clearest learning is you think about, forget about why the slap happened.
Right.
Think about what Will Smith wanted to accomplish at that moment, because he actually, in using violence, accomplished the opposite.
yeah,
So if you can imagine that he was angry and wanted to in some way hurt Chris Rock, that violence did the opposite,
yeah,
because Chris got sympathy and his ticket sales went way, way up. So
right
to
here in
me,
Boston.
that's the most important learning, that
Yeah.
violence is not the answer.
Exactly. I think he was trying to defend his wife's honor or dignity or something, but he didn't. First of all, he didn't have time to think about it. He acted, spontaneously, and when you act spontaneously, you generally do something suboptimal.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much, but I'm staying away from it because there's so many different perspectives, and people get upset having to hear the other perspectives.
But it makes people think, and making people think is both a good thing and a bad thing, because some people take umbrage at having somebody make them think.
So another point, I asked people, what would you have done if you were in the audience? Because I think that's worth thinking about.
I would have
I used-
murmured. The audience murmuring is like coughing. That sort of says there's something a little bit awry here, but I don't want to make a federal case out of it. So when the audience murmured, which I think they did, that
I
really
didn't hear
should have been
them.
enough. That should have been enough.
Well,
Not to
That
get
was-
too
that was-
controversial. Hey, not to get too controversial, but I would have defended the comedian's honor, which is Chris Rock, because he's the smaller person. And I would have walked right up to Will Smith and said, "You want to slap someone, slap me."
On
Because you
camera,
don't slap my
would you
friend
have
Chris
really
Rock.
done that on camera?
Yeah, I'm crazy like that. I've been known to do crazy things like that.
I've been known to step in between two competing people just to put space between them with my own body. I haven't done that very often. I've seen it done much more often than I've done it. But yeah, there is a way to insert
I
yourself.
apologize.
in
She's getting a little
nonviolent
cranky.
way.
I gotta go.
Okay, all right, bye-bye.
Say bye-bye. She didn't want to leave. She wants to keep talking.
I was just gonna say that there's the show with what's his name? Quinones. I can't think of his first name. What would you do? You know who I'm talking about?
I don't think.
No,
I've
I don't know
shown
that show.
you.
No. Oh my God. I'll have to send it to you, but it was a great show. And what they do is they set up these false scenarios and people come in and they tape how they reacted. It's like Candid Camera, but for grownups. And
Oh.
I always found that very useful because so many times I've been in a situation and after I've walked away, I was like, I should have done this. So when you get to see that before, you're more prepared. I will let Joshua go. Goodbye.
I think I
We're saying bye-bye. She's just getting a little cranky.
Right.
This is a TV
Thank you
personality.
for a
who-
great talk, by the way. Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye. Quinones.
I think, yeah, I have a vague recollection. that
John-
there's-
John Quinones.
Okay.
John Quinones. What would you do? It's called What Would You Do?
Yeah, that's classical. That's sort of like the WWJD. What would Jesus do? What would the best thinker do in this situation? And can you understand it and emulate it, or at least appreciate it?
But in the show, you actually get to see it play out.
Right. You get to see
And
what
by
happens.
not focusing on your own, you're not in the judgment seat because you're watching it happen to someone else. So we were watching it happen to Will and to, I mean, personally, I think Jada should have put her arm out and said, honey, sit, it's okay. But that's beside the point.
As opposed to maybe her prompting him to go up there. That's the other theory, that she prompted him to go up there. But I don't know the answer to that because, you don't have the evidence. But
There's so much speculation.
I know that's the problem,
I
is that
give
you
you
could,
on that.
you can write Saturday Night Live could write lots of sketches sort of riffing on all the variations on that. But, I actually gleaned a response, what would you do? I gleaned a response from I think it was an XKCD cartoon that Elizabeth Chung featured on her Facebook page a couple of years ago. And you simply say, so it has come to this. That's and I actually used it recently. So it has come to this.
But that's really good because what that does is it creates a space.
Right.
Which is nice.
It arrests it without arresting the person.
Yes. And with that, I'm going to go make something to eat. It was good
right.
seeing you. Are you gonna, well, I'll talk to you offline.
Yeah, I'm gonna,
Well,
unless, I think Sam is not here. So when you leave, I will end the session, and I think
Okay.
that will end this recording as well. Not
See you
sure.
later. Bye-bye.
And Sam, I'm going to end the session if I can. If it doesn't, then yes, I have end meeting for all. Here we go.